Hey everybody, it is Tuesday, June 20th. Welcome back after a holiday weekend. For many of you, you're listening to the Mo News podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Forgive the echoey sound here, Jill. I'm in a conference room, so hopefully we can improve the acoustics by the time everybody's listening in the morning. Jill, how was your holiday? Holidays, I should say.
It was great. Lots of family time. And you know what? Juneteenth is a new federal holiday. And as you've been talking about in the Instagram feed, and we put out a special podcast about it, more businesses this year than last year, and certainly than the year before, are giving their workers off to celebrate.
Yes, there's a federal holiday. It's our newest one, the first one since MLK Day in the 80s. So it's only 3 years old. About, according to the latest numbers, 40% of private businesses gave their employees paid time off on it. But you should know that technically as a private business, you're not obligated to give your employees paid time off on federal holidays, which is something I learned as people were asking about it in the last few days. I heard from a number of Mo News listeners who said their businesses gave them a choice between President's Day and Juneteenth Day. So bottom line, if you're a federal government employee, you had it off. If you're a state government employee, just over half the states have officially put into state law. I think it's 27 states plus DC. Private employers, you're about halfway there. But it appears that people are still kind of getting used to this holiday, especially in the context of being a couple weeks before Independence Day, where they, the vast majority of businesses do give their employees off.
And just a few weeks after Memorial Day.
Right.
Okay, with that, though, let's get to some news here. A sub headed to the site of the Titanic wreck has gone missing, the latest on the urgent search and rescue effort in the North Atlantic. The U.S. Secretary of State wraps up the most important U.S. diplomatic trip to China in about 5 years. We're going to have the headlines on what was and wasn't resolved. Why Donald Trump could benefit from classified records rules. UPS workers set the stage for the biggest strike in decades. What it could mean for your mail. A status check on the Ukrainian counteroffensive against Russia to retake parts of their country. We also check in on the red-hot Florida housing market and how much prices have gone up. And why Apple, the company, is trying to own the use of any picture of an apple anywhere on the globe. Its latest fight against farmers in Switzerland. And Moshe is on this day in history.
Here's your clue, Jill. Tin roof, rusted.
Love shine.
She's got it.
Oh my
She's got
God.
it.
It was a horrible, I'm so off tune, but yes, I got it.
It's early in the week. We hope you improve.
All right, let's start with the search of the tourist submersible that was en route to the wreckage of the Titanic. A submersible went missing in the area of the Titanic wreck in the North Atlantic on Sunday, setting off a search and rescue operation yesterday by the U.S. Coast Guard. Okay, by the way, the difference between a submersible and a submarine, according to NOAA, a submarine has enough power to leave port and come back to port under its own power. A submersible, however, has very limited power reserve, so it needs a mothership that can launch it and recover it. The U.S. Coast Guard is currently conducting search and rescue there alongside the Canadian Air Force, about 900 miles east of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. That's where the ocean is at a depth of about 13,000 feet. They're using C-130 planes and other assets. They're pretty much just searching the open ocean. It is a very challenging situation. The waters are rough. They're remote. The submersible is operated by Ocean Gate Expeditions. The U.S. Coast Guard says there are 5 people on board, and it lost communication about 1 hour and 45 minutes into its 8-hour dive. The submersible includes a pilot and what they call 4 mission specialists. Sky News is reporting that among those on board are British billionaire Hamish Harding, a French submarine pilot, as well as the founder of Ocean Gate, Stockton Rush. Ocean Gate takes paying tourists in submersibles to shipwrecks and underwater canyons. According to its website Monday, an expedition was currently underway. In a statement after the sub went missing, the company said that it was exploring all options to bring the crew back safely.
So we've been covering this extensively, Jill, over on the Mo News Instagram account. The Coast Guard has been briefing on this. They're searching the surface of the ocean with planes, and they're using what they call sonar buoys to listen for sound underwater. And so there are two scenarios here as we record this. The submersibles automatically go to the surface of the ocean if things break down. At the same time, if there was some sort of catastrophic situation, it might be in the bottom of the ocean or near the Titanic wreckage there. Lots of pressure down there, and the question is whether the submersible survived. So the Coast Guard has the assets to cover the surface of the ocean as well as the Canadians. There are only a few types of vessels in the world that can go this deep, 13,000 feet. Again, they're just going off a sound right now to just get a basic location of where they are. Now, according to the company, the life support within the submersible lasts about 96 hours or about 4 days for a crew of 5.
Meaning the oxygen?
Correct. Like all the various life support, most important, oxygen. As we record this, they're just more than a day in to that. So the estimate from the Coast Guard is they have 70-ish hours left. If you're waking up on Tuesday morning, it'll be closer to 50-something hours left of life support if the submersible is operating at full capacity. Now, this travels slow. Again, it's meant for an 8-hour mission. A couple hours down, a couple hours to check out the wreckage, and then a couple hours to return. You mentioned that British explorer Hamish Harding, he had posted on Facebook that he was going to be a part of this expedition. His family confirmed that he was on it. They're praying for his recovery. He happens to be quite the explorer, Jill. He holds several Guinness Book of World Records, including for the longest time spent traveling the deepest part of the oceans on a single dive. He's also been a space tourist with the Jeff Bezos craft. And so, he's done a bunch of these in the past. They're still gradually releasing the names here of who's on board. Notably, he did post on Facebook that this trip is likely to be the first and only manned mission to the Titanic this year due to very harsh weather conditions, but they believe they had found an opening in order to be able to go on this mission this week. Now, OceanGate offers tours of the Titanic in which each guest pays $250,000 for what is an 8-day expedition. They take a boat out there. They then train up for the submersible ride. They then take the 8-hour trip in the submersible down to the Titanic, return. Jill, I posted a clip of what it looks like inside the submersible that's meant for, again, 8 hours. Very tight quarters here. Incidentally, they use a PlayStation from a Sony PlayStation controller to operate it. I suggest anyone who's interested in more here can head over to the Mo News Instagram page, see a clip. They did a tour for Canadian Broadcasting recently. A very small window. I mean, they're mainly using digital monitors to see what is happening on the outside. There is a toilet aboard, which they showcase in this video. Apparently, Jill, I'm learning that they used an experimental hull, which is the outer casing of this submersible that had not undergone third-party testing. And that is, apparently there's various classes in which you can get your submarines tested, and they went an alternate route here. So I imagine you're going to be hearing more about that in the coming days.
Moshe, based on some of our texts back and forth, our newsletter text chain, our podcast text chain, and just based on your Instagram feed, you're very interested in this story. And look, we've both been in this business a long time, and certain stories just get us and we're hooked. What is it about this story that has captivated you so much?
I just think the unique nature of it, right? Like, it is so rare for people to be able to go down there. This is a experimental mission they've only done a few times. You have at least one billionaire aboard. Then there's just the history, the iconic nature of the Titanic itself, of which, we know that killed more than 1,500 people died in the Titanic. We apparently discovered the wreck of the Titanic about nearly 40 years ago. Now they have technology to send people down there. It sort of reminds me, Jill, of like space tourism, underwater tourism, kind of reaching the far lengths of the globe. And also, this is a mystery right now. We don't know what happened, right? We hope for the best. We pray for the best here. And this is way beyond what the Coast Guard typically does. U.S. Coast Guard, by the way, typically only handles 200 miles out. You're nearly 1,000 miles out here in open ocean. Incidentally, one of the planes they're using to try to find the submersible, Jill, is a iceberg search plane, which is a mission launched by the governments of Canada and the U.S. after the Titanic hit an iceberg. So there's just incredible historical parallels. And so there's a lot of depth to the story. And so, stop me if none of you find this interesting, but I was fascinated by it on Monday.
A little bit of history. Even if you have seen the Titanic, you might not remember all of the details. The actual ship, the Titanic, sank in 1912 on its maiden voyage from England to New York after hitting an iceberg, killing more than 1,500 people. The wreckage was found in 1985. It was broken into two main sections, hundreds of miles off of Newfoundland in eastern Canada, and has since attracted the attention of experts and amateurs alike.
Yeah, you can find pieces. Actually, I heard from a bunch of people who are like, I've been to a museum. I think there's a museum in Vegas that has some wreckage pieces. And they're like, between the movie and documentaries and museums, I think I'm good at not going 13,000 feet below below sea level to search and see the wreckage up close, Jill. But we will keep everyone up to date on this very developing story right now as there's this desperate attempt to try to find this group of 5 explorers.
All right, switching gears now to those high stakes US-China meetings in Beijing over the weekend. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that his trip to Beijing marked what he called an important start in stabilizing US ties with China, and that the countries should move on from the spy balloon incident that postponed his earlier visit. He told NBC News before leaving for Beijing, he told NBC News, quote, that chapter should be closed. Meanwhile, he did spend 2 days meeting with senior Chinese officials, including a surprise meeting with President Xi Jinping. Apparently, it was so up in the air, Moshe, that even Blinken didn't know if it was going to happen until about 45 minutes before the trip. Though fundamental disagreements remain over pretty big issues like Taiwan and cyber hacking, the consensus between Blinken, Xi, and other Chinese officials is to continue these high-level discussions going forward. They call this a crucial step to ensure that tensions between the two superpowers do not escalate into a conflict. Blinken's the first U.S. Secretary of State to visit China in 5 years and the most senior Biden administration official to make the trip. During the visit, Blinken also met with other senior Chinese officials, including the foreign minister. Blinken said that he agreed to visit Washington at a, quote, suitable time. Blinken also said that the U.S. has a long history of successfully managing complicated relationships through diplomacy. He did not mention, though, whether progress was made on key areas of disagreement. We mentioned Taiwan, human rights issues related to the Uyghur Muslims, or trade.
So Secretary of State Blinken did say that the Chinese side has agreed to set up what they call a joint working group on narcotics. It comes as the U.S. continues to face a fentanyl crisis here at home. China, incidentally, is a major source of illicit fentanyl-related chemicals flowing to the U.S. There's a whole flow of those chemicals coming from China into Mexico, into the hands of the cartels, and the fentanyl coming off to the U.S. And the U.S. has been trying to talk to the Chinese about nipping that source of fentanyl in the bud. So they do have that working group going, but China did not agree to set up one of the big U.S. goals, which was a military-to-military communications channel. That's something the U.S. has been pushing for a while, would have been useful in the balloon situation, sort of a red phone, if you will, between the Chinese military and the U.S. military. So far, no agreement on that. And this all comes, Jill, as we've been talking a lot on the podcast about how Xi and Biden are under growing pressure from other nations around the world to tamp down on the contentiousness in their relationship. The rest of the world has been watching as things have gotten more aggressive between the U.S. and China, and the rest of the world is saying, hey, guys, can you tone it down for the rest of us? And so, there are a lot of issues.
Mom, Dad, can you guys get along?
Exactly. I think we had Ian Bremmer on last year who described China and the U.S. as divorced parents with custody of the world, the two largest economies, the two most powerful militaries. And so, as the tensions have been skyrocketing, right, over the course, you can go back to the Nancy Pelosi visit to Taiwan, then, of course, the Kevin McCarthy visit with the Taiwanese president recently. Add to that, of course, Balloon Gate, and that comes on top of other issues, right? The status of Taiwan. It's effectively an independent island that Beijing claims as its territory, that the U.S. supports its independence, but also says it's part of China, but that China shouldn't actually occupy it. So Taiwan, very complicated, and China's been looking at the next few years at potentially invading Taiwan if you talk to military and intelligence experts. China writ large has been trying to expand its military footprint across South Asia. That's been of concern to the US and our allies. China's also been developing hypersonic missiles and advanced technologies, cyber hacking, a whole bunch of issues the US is not happy about. Then, of course, there's China's support for Russia and the war in Ukraine, and the issue you brought up, human rights and the treatment of nearly more than 1 million Uyghur Muslims in the Western provinces that are reportedly held in concentration camps in China right now. So a lot of issues. It appears this Blinken visit went well, but there's a lot more that needs to be dealt with in the coming months.
All right, time now for the speed read from CBS News. UPS workers are gearing up for a potential strike that would be the biggest U.S. labor walkout since the 1950s. Member of the Teamsters Union, which represents about 340,000 workers at the package delivery company, voted overwhelmingly on Friday to strike if no agreement is reached with UPS by the time the current contract expires in less than 6 weeks on July 31st. 97% of voting members approved the strike, although it's not clear how many people turned out for the vote. The union wants higher pay, the elimination of so-called two-tier wages where newer workers are paid less than older employees for the same job, the removal of surveillance cameras from delivery trucks, and more full-time jobs. The president of the Teamsters Union, Sean O'Brien, said in a statement that UPS is a multi-billion-dollar corporation that is failing to deliver on a contract that hardworking members deserve. Earlier this week, the Teamsters secured a major win for the New Deal when UPS committed to install air conditioning and 2 driver-facing fans in most trucks. Heat safety has been a very big concern for UPS workers, with many incidents of drivers getting sick from heat stroke.
Yeah, Jill, many people were surprised when we talked about this on the Instagram account a few days ago that it wasn't mandatory to have air conditioning in the UPS trucks. The two sides here reached tentative agreement on that, but they've been negotiating a national contract since April and have this deadline coming up in just about 6 weeks now. The big issues, though, ahead: pay increases, which Teamsters say are way overdue due to the company's strong pandemic-era performance. Keep in mind, UPS's adjusted net income increased by more than 70% from 2019 to just last year. So the belief among the Teamsters is that has not been passed along to the drivers. The current contract for the UPS drivers has been unpopular for a while now. It actually led to the ouster of the previous leadership team before O'Brien came in here and has been vocal about their willingness to strike here. Historical context, which I think is important for people to know. A strike at UPS would be the biggest work stoppage in the US since 1959. That year saw a steel worker strike that saw 500,000 workers walk out for about 4 months. Now, UPS workers themselves last went on strike back in 97, so just about 26 years ago. It was a 15-day walkout that crippled the company and did end in a win for the union. But right now, the workforce of UPS is twice the size as it was back in 97. 1 in 4 packages shipped in the US is handled by UPS every day. The company handles 24 million packages on an average day. So the Teamsters, the union here, believe that they have leverage here in terms of the contract. They have the leverage here in terms of the profit that UPS has been making. And UPS knows how much damage that 97 strike did and does not want to repeat it. It also comes, Jill, we've talked about this for a few months now. You've seen these high-profile union campaigns at Apple, at Starbucks, at Trader Joe's, and there does seem to be more oomph behind some of these union moves to negotiate what they feel is a fair compensation and fair benefits for their employees.
From the Washington Post, as former President Trump prepares for a trial on charges that he repeatedly violated government rules for handling classified information, his legal team may get a tactical timing advantage because of government rules for handling such secrets. Trump's indictment on dozens of charges, including mishandling classified documents and trying to obstruct investigators' efforts to recover that material, means that his case will be tried under the rules of the Classified Information Procedures Act, or CIPA. It's a law that could, in theory, delay any trial until after the 2024 presidential election. Trump and some of his GOP competitors have slammed the investigation as partisan, suggesting that any one of them could try to force the Justice Department to drop the case if they are elected next November. One of the issues that could lead to a delay is that it can take weeks or even months for a defense lawyer to get security clearance, and Trump frequently switches counsel. Also, the discovery process for evidence just takes longer because of the classified nature of the documents. Plus, there can be complications with classified documents that are privately shown to the jury in their entirety, but the details are obscured when presented in the public courtroom.
Yeah, there are a lot of complicating factors here, Jill, especially when you're dealing with 31 of the counts have to do with 31 specific classified records. And you're talking about U.S. nuclear secrets, major military secrets for the U.S. and our allies. So the nature of these documents actually could delay the process further. And so the irony here, Jill, is that this law actually enables the government to pursue cases involving classified documents that it might otherwise drop, because it actually creates a framework in order for them to deal with it at trial. But at the same time, these trials legally require more precautions because they tend to take more time than a typical criminal case, because you have to literally go through each document to determine, are the lawyers able to see it? Can we ensure that these secrets don't get out? How does the government feel about these secrets? Are these things that can even be declassified at some point? So you're going document by document by document here, and you're dealing with the lawyers, in this case, the defendant, the jury, the judge, and this is being done in the federal district in Florida, where they don't have experience with this sort of thing, and they, did it on purpose down in Florida, versus DC. So Trump couldn't argue that, it's an overwhelmingly Democratic jury in D.C., but in D.C., it so happens that they have a lot of experience with classified records cases. So it's like, you win some, you lose some here. Now, incidentally, the special counsel, Jack Smith, who's leading the case, he said he wants to do this as quickly as possible, but given the legal requirements, given the classified information, given this law that this would fall under, and the judge, Aileen Cannon, who has little experience with this could take a while. By the way, Jill, one ironic note, this law that allows for classified records trials, SIPA, passed in the late 70s. A certain senator is the one who proposed it. His name was Joe Biden.
Moshe, that's actually kind of wild.
Joe Biden, as a senator in the late 70s, was a sponsor of the legislation that is dealing with these classified records. And it's so interesting because of how significant, if Trump just had any old classified records, this might be much easier. But given how significant these records are, that's going to make the trial even more challenging. And again, if a Republican gets elected, if he gets elected, this case could be kaput. And that is why, Jack Smith wants to make this happen as quickly as possible. So there are scenarios here where they could drop some of the indictment charges just so there's less documents to deal with.
I feel like it's the definition of irony. Alanis Morissette, of course, with her song Ironic, which I think none of her examples were ironic. They were just
raining
bad
on your
luck.
wedding day?
Yes, This is real irony.
Another irony, he increased the sentences for this crime because of Hillary Clinton. So he would actually potentially be going to prison longer because he actually made the sentence worse. So this gets deep, and there are so many layers to this.
All right, from the Wall Street Journal, look at why the Ukrainian counteroffensive is not making much progress in its first few weeks. Ukraine's troops are attempting a feat few modern militaries would dare without a robust air force, trying to dislodge Russian troops that have spent months digging themselves in. Ukraine's early setbacks are a sign that their offensive will be a long, deadly grind and not a repeat of their rout of Russian troops in the northeast region of Kharkiv late last summer. The fight unfolding now is a slugfest on the battlefield, and it's more fundamentally a battle of readiness. Both sides, since the middle of last year, have been mustering weapons, troops, and defensive positions for what they knew would be a pivotal moment. And while Ukraine has gotten billions of dollars worth of advanced arms and armor from its Western allies, Russia has called up more than 200,000 soldiers. They've dug trenches and have spread potentially millions of landmines.
Yeah, Jill, a Ukrainian unit driving advanced U.S. and European equipment earlier this month drove into one of those minefields. It quickly incapacitated several tanks, armored fighting vehicles. Other units have faced aerial attacks from Russian helicopter gunships, missiles launched from the air and the ground. And so, faced with those setbacks, Ukrainian commanders over recent days have had to pause some of their advances and reassess their tactics here. Jill, we've been talking for months about this counteroffensive. So the Russians knew this was coming and they prepared for it. So the Ukrainians are figuring out new tactics here. They've sent in commandos to try to find in some weak points in the Russian defenses. You're talking about a 600-mile battle line across Ukraine. Russia currently occupies an eastern flank of Ukraine about the size of Maryland. And so they can pursue some tactics here that'll allow them to break through, but it's going to take a while. So unless there are some major surprises here, do not expect a quick retake of the country by the Ukrainians. And of course, they plan this for late spring, early summer, because that's warm season there. So they want to be able to accomplish what they can by the time it gets cold again in the winter. And by then, Jill, the concern among the Ukrainians is how long do they have when it comes to the West, sending them weapons, continuing to give them support. So far, it looks like the West has remained solid behind Ukraine, but they also need to see progress from the Ukrainians. If they don't see progress, you may start to hear some Western voices in terms of leadership say to the Ukraine, hey, it might be time to sit at the table, and this really sucks, but you're going to have to compromise on what the Russians have taken from your country.
And Moshe, as I was describing just how brutal the next few months of battle is going to be, I'm just thinking about all the people who are going to lose their lives. For what? It's so incredibly sad.
Well, I mean, that's a general philosophy on war, right? Like, for what are people fighting over? In this case, you might literally be talking about several, feet or a mile or two, for leverage in a possible negotiation or likely negotiation at some point. Should we're nearly 18 months in, next February would mark 2 years of the war. How long can this last? Unfortunately, you're talking about millions of mines, Jill. How will people live in those areas? Their mines sometimes, are out there. I mean, there are mines going back decades from the war in Vietnam. And other areas of the world. So you're permanently making areas of this country unlivable.
All right, back here in the U.S. from Bloomberg News, Florida is losing its affordability edge after drawing a flood of new arrivals. A stampede of Northerners in search of sunshine and cheaper living sent Florida's housing market into a frenzy through the pandemic, with prices climbing 50% in the last 3 years. And it comes as soaring mortgage rates and insurance premiums have eroded one of Florida's most alluring attributes historically, which is an affordable home and lifestyle. One top destination for New Yorkers heading south, Miami, is now the most unaffordable metro area in the United States, according to May data from Realty Hop on home ownership expenses relative to income. Bloomberg reports that the manic demand is finally starting to wane, with fewer people moving in recent months. Single-family home prices in Florida have now flattened for the first time since 2011.
So, Jill, this Bloomberg story is chock full of a lot of numbers. So far this year, 56% more people have moved into Florida than moved out. That's data from United Van Lines. That's down from 58% in 2022 and 62% in 2021, which was the peak of pandemic migration. So the numbers meaning 56% of people moving into Florida, 44% of people moving out. And that's down when they just had the, massive amount of people coming in the past couple of years. Now, Florida is not equal when it comes to prices across the state. Looking at Tampa for the last few weeks, prices there fell just under 4% over the last month. Jacksonville down 2%. But then in Miami, prices in that same period are up 8.9%. So South Florida is still really hot. You are starting to see some of the prices coming down in northern Florida. That's also where properties are lingering longer on the market than at the same time last year. So that's housing prices. Then you have a couple of other issues, including insurance. Florida's insurance industry is in crisis right now as a result of catastrophic storms, a flurry of fraudulent claims. That has pushed now the average annual home insurance premium to $6,000, which is nearly 4 times the U.S. average.
All right, from Wired magazine, the Swiss Fruit Union is 111 years old. But stay with me here. There's a reason we're telling you about this. For most of its history, it's had as its symbol a red apple with a white cross, the Swiss national flag, superimposed on one of its most common fruits. But the group, which is the oldest and largest fruit farmers organization in Switzerland, worries that it might have to change its logo because Apple, the tech giant, is trying to gain intellectual property rights over depictions of apples, the fruit. And this is part of a global trend. According to the World Intellectual Property Organization's records, Apple has made similar requests to dozens of IP authorities around the world with varying degrees of success in Japan, Turkey, Israel, and Armenia. Authorities have acquiesced. Apple's quest to own the IP rights of something as generic as a fruit speaks to the dynamics of a flourishing global IP rights industry, which encourages companies to compete obsessively over trademarks that they don't really need.
Yeah, so I found this story interesting, Jill, that literally, you cannot draw an apple anywhere in the world without getting the wrath of Apple computers, Apple tech. And so Apple, apparently going back as far as 2017, submitted an application in Switzerland saying they want to own all depictions of the Granny Smith apple, the generic green apple. So that request covered an extensive list, use electronically, digitally, consumer goods, hardware. There was a protracted fight over that. And then the Swiss last fall said you can have partial rights to the use of an apple. But the Swiss said that they consider generic images of common goods, like apples, to be public domain. So in the spring now, Apple has launched an appeal. So they're going to continue that fight. But Apple has been pursuing this globally. Apparently, they pursued a meal prepping app with a pear logo, a singer-songwriter named Frankie Pineapple, a German cycling route that was the shape of an apple, stationery makers. One thing going far back, Jill, they fought a decades-long battle with the Beatles music label, Apple Accor, which was finally resolved back in 2007. The Swiss Fruit Union, I like this quote. This is the head of the Swiss Fruit Union here. And we don't commonly get to quote the Swiss Fruit Union, so I thought this was a rare opportunity. He says, we're not looking to compete with Apple. We have no intention of going to the same field as them. There are 8,000 apple farmers in Switzerland, and Apple didn't invent apples. We've been around, our union has, for 111 years, and I think apples have been around for a few thousand years. Jill, this is not just Apple here. Google, Amazon, they try to control certain language. When I was at CBS News a few years ago, we were trying to call a show CBS News Prime that was going to air in the evenings. And our lawyers came back saying, you can't use the word prime. I'm like, why? Prime time, prime hours. They're like, no, Amazon basically owns the word prime now. Like they don't, but we're scared of going to court with them and they're going to sue us over use of the word prime. And so we ended up having to go with a different name for the show because effectively everyone's decided that some of these tech companies are so large that you have to give up, in this case, on the word prime, or in the case of the Swiss or anyone else around the world, don't draw an apple and include it in your logo.
Well, I'm still going to draw apples. And if they want to come after me, they can.
Well, you can draw apples all you want, Jill. They're not yet coming into your home, but we can't use an apple. But if we wanted to put an apple next to Mo News, we cannot. We're not going to be doing that over here. Even
without the bite mark.
We're not messing, Jill. We're too small. Okay, now time for On This Day in History. We're going to be in 1885. This week in 1885, the Statue of Liberty arrived in New York Harbor. A French frigate brought it aboard. Of course, it was a gift from France, a gift of friendship from the people of France to the United States. The 151-foot tall statue was created to commemorate the centennial of American independence from 1776 to 1876. Of course, it would take a few extra years there, and it would arrive in 1885. Jill, fun fact, depending on historical depictions you see of the Statue of Liberty, it was originally copper brown. It's made of copper. So if you look at older depictions of the Statue of Liberty, it was a big brown statue. But then weathering led it to turn to its blue-green color that many people are familiar with today.
Wouldn't be the same if it wasn't green.
Now, fast forward to the 20th century, 1963 today, the red phone was agreed to between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Jill, earlier on the podcast, we're talking about establishing one between the U.S. and Chinese military. Well, it's inspired partially by this phone line that was installed between the U.S., at least today was the agreement anniversary. 2 months later, President Kennedy would use it for the first time on August 30th, 1963, to call his counterparts in Russia. On this day 34 years ago, Jill, the B-52s released their song Love Shack, June 20th, 1989. Apparently, it was based on a music club the group used to go to in rural Georgia that inspired the name Love Shack.
It sounds fun. I'd love to go there. At least according to the music video.
The music video is great,
that video.
Right? It's a classic music video, a lot of fun. That's when they used to really spend their time on the music videos, because to break through on MTV back in the day, you had to have a great music video, and that would then help with, at that time, cassette tape sales. It would soon, that was the era you were transitioning to CD, actually, in the early 90s. And on this day in 1975, Steven Spielberg's thriller Jaws, Jill, hit theaters, huge success, essentially creating the genre of the summer blockbuster in the summer of 75 then. And now, through the years, through the decades, we've all been waiting for the studios to release their big summer thrillers. Apparently that began. Steven Spielberg gets a lot of credit in cinema, in cinematic history. Among them, the creation of the summer blockbuster.
And that iconic da-na-na-na has a really interesting backstory.
Yeah, so interestingly, Jill, there was a composer named John Williams, who we now consider legendary, who was struggling to break through in Hollywood at the time. And he connects with Spielberg. They would, of course, go on to create some of the most iconic movie theme songs, E.T., Schindler's List, etc., through the years. But a young John Williams and a very young Steven Spielberg get together, and he assigns John Williams the challenge of creating the Jaws theme, including the sound the shark will make. And so apparently Spielberg has talked about this in a bunch of interviews. And so John Williams comes in and says, I've created a sound for the shark. And Spielberg says he expected to hear something weird and melodic, something tonal, he says, something of another world, outer space, under the water. And Williams comes in and just plays the two notes, da, 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 da. And apparently Spielberg laughed. He's like, you're making a joke here, right? Like, this is the sound of the shark. And Williams is like, no, it's going to totally work. Spielberg, of course, would give him a lot of credit, and he says later that he thinks the score, that iconic da 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 da, is responsible for half the success of the movie.
It certainly is synonymous, not only with the movie, but just that idea of like something bad's about to happen.
And it's so simple, right? It's two notes. Da, da. Like, Spielberg was like, give me something grand. And Williams is like, no, it's as simple as this. And what's interesting, there's a whole history of Jaws. They were having a lot of issues with the animatronic shark for the movie. And so they ended up not being able to use the animatronic shark as much as they thought, which meant that he relied on the soundtrack much more than he was thinking, which is one of the reasons, again, it's just hammered into all of our brains, and why it was just so effective. The simplicity of it was so effective because they ended up having to use it a lot more in the film than they anticipated. And frankly, Spielberg believes that it actually was more effective than a really expensive animatronic shark, because the menacing nature of, like, you don't know where the shark is, but as the dun-dun gets faster, the shark is getting closer.
Moshe, great on this day, just a couple days before the actual start of summer here, as everybody's going to be going into the ocean. Feel safe.
By the way,
we're
going to do a whole fact check on that. I know there have been a couple shark attacks in the news, but the safety that you have out there, the rarity of shark attacks, it's still very, very rare, folks. So you can feel safe, especially in shallow waters.
And on that note, we want to thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Review us in the App Store so we can continue to grow.
And appreciate all of you who have joined Mo News Premium. Please head over to mo.news/premium to officially join what we call the Mo News team. It's a way to support what we're doing here at Mo News, help us continue to sustain what we're doing, as well as grow. You'll also get access to a members-only podcast, as well as members-only Instagram account. And Jill, you have a big interview coming up on that members-only podcast this week.
Yes, as I've talked about on this podcast before, my daughter had a slew of food allergies, and she went through a program that really helped her. And after I mentioned it a few weeks ago, I got tons of messages from people asking me about the program. So we decided that I should just interview Amy, who created it. And I think that if you have food allergies, or know somebody with food allergies, you'll find it pretty fascinating. And not only that, I think if you're suffering from anything really, and you're looking for maybe an alternative type of approach, I think it would definitely be worth a listen.
Yeah, one of the most popular posts on their Instagram account last week was related to a new study related to peanut allergies. So definitely a lot of interest out there. So look out for that on the Mo News Premium members only podcast this week. All things allergies with Jill Wagner.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Later.